So it's a difficult product to make. It's an expensive product to make. So a lot of the times it is, okay, we have something that works and that's it. We're not going to keep going into, okay, well, maybe we'll make it a little bit lighter and do this. It's like, look, here's an SPF 50. Take it or leave it.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome back to Unpacking Beauty. This is the podcast that answers questions about the science, marketing, and trends in the beauty space. My name is Kelly Driscoll. I am the creator and host, and I'm also a skincare enthusiast on YouTube. Now, if you're into skincare, you know the most important product that you could possibly be using in your routine is sunscreen. Oh yeah, we've been hearing it for years. Wear your sunscreen 24/7. Absolutely every single day. Not only is this a product that is going to protect your health because it helps to prevent skin cancer, but it's also a product that helps to protect your youth, if you will. You know, sunscreen does help to protect the collagen structure, which helps to keep our skin firm and lifted. It helps to resist the formation of fine lines and wrinkles. And sunscreen also helps to prevent hyperpigmentation and sun damage on the skin as well. It has a multitude of benefits. It really is, as I said, one of those number one products that absolutely should be in your skincare routine. But sunscreen is complicated. Finding the very right one for you is really, really hard. There are so many factors that go into making a sunscreen work for you. And as a skincare enthusiast on YouTube, I do get questions all the time about how can I find the perfect sunscreen? Like, what's the very best one out there? And my answer to that is always the one that you will joyfully apply every single day, because that's the key, right? Sunscreen, you have to wear it every day in order for it to work for you. And yet the textures can be really thick. They can be greasy. Sometimes they don't work well underneath makeup. They start to ball and pill up. Of course, we also have issues of things like white cast. You know, not every single sunscreen, if it has a bit of a cast to it, is going to work for every skin tone out there. There's no such thing as a universal sunscreen. And so I really wanted to tackle this subject because, as I mentioned, this is one of the most important skincare products that we use. Being able to have the tools to find the right one is so important. Today, I am so thrilled to welcome Dr. Julian Sass to the podcast. Julian is a sunscreen expert, a formulator, and works in research and development for new skincare products. Julian has created an entire sunscreen database compiled of over 500 sunscreen reviews. So this is an amazing resource for you to use when you're trying to narrow down the perfect sunscreen for you. You can plug in all the different qualities that you love about sunscreen into Julian's database, and you'll get some products that are going to fit your needs. This is such an amazing resource because if I haven't mentioned it already, it's super complicated to find that perfect sunscreen that you want to apply every single day. So in today's conversation, not only do we tackle the things that make sunscreen so complicated in the first place, Julian really pulls the curtain back a little bit on what goes behind the formulation and the development of sunscreens. We also talk about different ingredients that you might want to look for that aren't zinc and titanium that can cause a cast or white cast in sunscreens. He also shares with us some tips for finding the sunscreen that we feel very comfortable with the level of protection. We trust that what's inside of the bottle is matching up to that labeled protection. We also talk about hyperpigmentation. As I mentioned, this is a condition that can be really helped out with sunscreen. And Julian walks us through his 4-step process, the ASTP model for hyperpigmentation, and how we can use sunscreen in those 4 steps and some other brightening ingredients that work really well alongside of it to tackle different concerns with hyperpigmentation. And finally, we dive into the question of representation in the industry, especially in skincare and within science. There is a gap of representation, and that's very clear with the sunscreen products that are available on the market today. So we dive into a little bit of that. It is quite a complex topic, but that's really what today's question is all about. How can we make sunscreen less complicated? Dr. Julian Sass, welcome to Unpacking Beauty. I am so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a treat. Big fan for a long time. So thank you so much for reaching out. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
Oh, thank you. I am definitely excited to jump into all things sunscreen with you because this is like your passion. This is your purpose in life, I feel like. And you have a lot to share with us. So, before we dive into the conversation, I would love it just for those who are listening and watching who maybe aren't familiar with your work, if you can just give us a short introduction to who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Julian Sass. So I come from an academic background. I now work in the beauty industry in research and development, a little bit of formulation. You're actually sitting in my lab right now. So I have a bunch of materials right behind me, and all my mixers and hot plates are all behind you. So I really work on research and development of skincare products. So I'm thinking about formulations, looking at raw materials, the actual ingredients. I'm looking at how we test things to make sure that they're effective and safe and that they work as well. So really just all aspects of the goop in the jar is what I do. And in terms of like my social content, I talk a lot about sunscreen. That's really been a passion project of mine, which kind of came really unexpectedly, I think. And now it's very much what I'm known for. I'm sure, I run a sunscreen database that has a lot of sunscreen reviews on it, just trying to make sunscreen accessible for everyone, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there. People don't know how to find the right one that works for them. Just trying to get a lot of information out to help people find something that might work for them. So that's the nutshell of what I do.
Yes, and I was watching your Instagram reel the other day where you were just like saying more like information about who you are, and you said that you had a background in musical theater, and I was like, I have a background in theater too. So I was like, connection. I don't know where the pipeline of like theater to skincare and sunscreen is, but it's there.
I have no idea either, but I'm not complaining.
Totally. So let's talk about that sunscreen database project because this is something that I think is super unique on the internet. It's a huge resource for people, as you said, who are maybe struggling to find the right product out there for their needs. Can you tell me about how many sunscreens you've added to your database, and what are the factors that you consider when you're reviewing and adding products into your database?
So we just hit 500
Oh my
sunscreens
gosh.
on the database, which is crazy to me. Like, to think
Yeah.
that all those things have been on my face and I've tested everything.
Yeah.
It's been a lot. It's been a lot. But yeah, we've hit
Wow.
500 on there. And in terms of the criteria, it's all of the things that I feel like people want to know. Like, what is the finish like? Does it have a white cast? What's the texture? Like, what's the protection? Does it have things against UVA? All of those things that like consumers want to know about a product before they buy it. But it's hard to just look at a container and kind of know unless it really spells it out, like
Yeah.
on the label. It's like, oh, unless it's like, matte moment or something like that, on the product, then you really don't know about those things. So yeah, finish, white cast, lots of different factors. How does it spread? How does it look on the skin? All those little things that I feel like is really important to consumers, and just like logging them all and saying, okay, here's my experience with them. Like I feel like it's just me talking about things, but just doing it in a very organized mathematical sort of way, and it's been a real like labor of love. It's been difficult for sure, but I have really enjoyed like getting it set up, getting it improved, and adding things to it all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's so helpful to have everything in one place because you could be interested in one or two products, but then you have to go, you've got like 20 tabs open in your browser and you're like, what's the texture here? This person says that. How does it look on this skin tone versus that skin tone? Does it work
Yeah.
for makeup? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things. And I think for me, because when I was thinking about how I wanted to compile all my reviews, I was thinking, okay, do I do a YouTube channel? Because, on YouTube, of course, like things can last a whole lot longer, but it's harder to like search for individual products, especially if you do like multiple
Yeah.
things in one video. If I do
Mhm.
Instagram, the search on Instagram is terrible, hard to find things on there. And it's just like, okay, and even if you can search it, what if someone isn't looking for like a product and just wants to know, oh, I have dry skin, so I want something that's like really moisturizing and, has this SPF, and I just want a list of products. So I wanted to think about how to get that done in the most optimal way. It is optimal from like a user perspective. Setting it all up was a nightmare, but
Yeah.
now now it's definitely just like, okay, just adding things onto it. I think it's in a really good place in terms of how I have everything set up.
And I think that that is an amazing resource. So definitely shout out. It's going to be in the show notes if anybody wants to take that database for a whirl and see if you can narrow down some interesting sunscreens for you. But I would really love to talk about why it's so hard to find a good sunscreen. Since you've tried at least 500 of them, you've come across greasy textures, eye sting, white cast, pilling. Why is sunscreen so complicated? I mean, that's a really big question, but why is it so hard to find one that works for a majority of people?
It's hard because it is a very functional product that has to work a certain way. And a lot of the times when you're, in the lab and the focus is more on getting something that works than something that is elegant. And it's also
Mm,
expensive. So when you have a formula that works, okay, this is SPF 50, great. And you already spent thousands of dollars on going through formula iterations, doing the testing. Like testing a sunscreen on people to get the SPF is thousands of dollars.
yeah.
And so once you have something that works, then it's like, okay, now I gotta think about textures. Like, oh, do people like this? Like when you're thinking about it from a formulation perspective, it's a very functional product. And that's how a lot of brands go into it, saying, okay, this is something that is functional, that might not need to be as elegant. I mean, we've all tried those terrible drugstore sunscreens. It's just like, why would anyone ever make this? Like, this is a horrendous experience. But from their perspective, it just needs to work and function because, at least in the US, it's a drug that has to perform a job,
Mhm,
and that's the main thing. Now we've kind of seen gonna make a term like the skincarification of
mhm.
sunscreen, where now you have brands that have these really elegant textures and all those things, and sort of incorporating that into their formulation philosophy. And so that has really given rise to lots of much better products. But from a formulation perspective, it's an expensive product to make, just because getting all the filters to spread the right way on the skin, and just getting everything to work synergistically is really,
Yeah.
really hard. So it's a difficult product to make. It's an expensive product to make. So a lot of the times it is, okay, we have something that works and that's it. We're not going to keep going into, okay, well, maybe we'll make it a little bit lighter and do this. It's like, look, here's an SPF 50, take it or leave it.
Yeah. Totally. And that actually makes me think then that we're probably in maybe like a renaissance period for sunscreen, because what you're saying is prior to the last 5, 10 years, it's been a functional product that's regulated like a drug. And I think, especially in the United States, North America, we do relate to sunscreen as what we use on vacation, right? This is what we put on our body when we're on the beach, which might be a rarity for the majority of us, right? And so it's fine. We know it's protecting our skin from the sun and from our beach days, but we're not necessarily wearing it every single day. And as you mentioned, that the explosion of the skincare hobby and popularity and interest, I think the consumer demand is now on sunscreens to be more elegant for an everyday rather than a beach day kind of performance, and that's new for this market. So as you were saying, like it's so complicated just to make it, and now there's these new demands about like the end user experience and textures and things like that beyond protection. In your experience testing so many things, do you think that that's why so many especially Asian beauty sunscreens seem like they are further ahead than the Western brands are?
Yeah, so I talked about this in a video, but I think that something that a lot of consumers don't really realize is that the way that people perceive a product working, or just how the market thinks a product should work, dictates how that product gets made. So, as you were saying, we're thinking about our sunscreen usage in the US. It's very beach days. Like, we think about thicker textures because people think that thicker means more protective. Like, that's the majority of the world, like of their view on sunscreen. But when you think about in East Asia, we're wearing sunscreen on a regular basis is much more common, then the consumer demand is for those lighter, more pleasant textures, work well under makeup, work well with the BB creams and the CC creams and all of those things. Like that's what the demand is.
Mm.
And those things are possible, but you have to have a large enough market demand for that in the region where you are to make those products happen. Because in the US, I know, like, in our community, we of course have these, okay, we want elegant textures or whatever. But when you think about the people who are running to Walmart to get something to go to the beach, they're not looking for, an elegant fluid sunscreen that feels like nothing like that. That's not what they want. And so for us, that's why those Asian sunscreens really do seem like, oh my gosh, they're ahead of the game because that's what we want. But when
Mm.
you're looking at kind of the larger market, the demand isn't yet there. We're getting there, but it's not quite hit the like zeitgeist of, okay, all the big multinationals saying, okay, we need to shift gears and make really elegant formulas because that's just the way that our culture views sun protection as a whole. So the power of consumer is strong and it's really hard to shift that opinion, but things are changing slowly but surely. I'm really hoping, but yeah, it's a hard nut to crack for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely seen like a lot of the kind of like boutique-y, sort of like independent skincare brands like that are launching at Target or whatever. They all seem like they're coming out with the exact same mineral sunscreen formula. I'm like, these are literally the same. What is like, is everybody sharing the same formula around here? There's nothing different from this brand to this brand to this brand. But I think that just speaks to we're at this like maybe we're at the beginning of the renaissance, but it's still kind of like that like awkward in between period between like functional and then like the aesthetic and like and the experience of it. And it's just still a little bit awkward, but we're moving forward. But I think that is why so many of us have noticed that big gap in that end user experience when it comes to K beauty and J beauty sunscreens versus maybe what we're picking up at Target and Sephora here in the States.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things about, when you're in a retailer and you see a lot of those similar products, because what some brands will do, because sunscreen is so expensive to make, is that they will go to a company that has lots of formulas just like ready and say,
Yeah.
okay, I want this one. They'll make some tweaks and say, okay, this is going to be your sunscreen. And that is not something that I personally have an issue with because I feel like we want more people to be wearing sunscreen, of course. And it really does kind of limit the uniqueness of a lot of those formulas because these brands are being asked, okay, make this product, but it can be really expensive to
Yeah.
do. And so to have someone say like, okay, here's something that we've already made, tested, done, this is what it is. And then you can go forth and make your piece, make it a part of your brand, make it a part of your story. Then that's how we have a lot of these very, very similar formulas that are coming out, which, some people like, some people don't, but it's a really complex nut to crack when you have these pressure from lots of different things to do a certain thing. And it's just, okay, we're doing the best we can with what we have.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense when you kind of have a better understanding of what goes on behind it. Then I think it's like, okay, I get what's going on with this formula or why everything feels similar or why can't I find something good right now here, in town. I have to order online. I would love to talk to you about white cast because I think that this is the one of the biggest struggles for so many of us when it comes to sunscreen. I think that's what makes it so complicated is it can make you look ashy. It can make you look like Casper. You can get streaks if you have dark hair or beard. It's going to like get all caught up in there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the worst. I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, yeah, this looks fine. And I'll go out and I'll be like shopping or whatever, catch a glimpse of myself, a reflection in the mirror. And I'm like, no, what happened? Why? like people let me like nobody said anything. Like why? It's like from here, it's just so white and so ashy, or it's like built up in my eyebrows. So I would love to talk to you, A, about white cast, and B, talk about some of the more uncommon ingredients that can cause that type of effect on skin, because obviously we know the usual suspects, zinc, titanium, they're going to have a white cast. They have like a white-based pigment to them inherently. But are there other ingredients too that we should look out, some sneaky ways that we might be able to tell if something is going to look casty on us?
Yeah, it's a hard thing. So the reason why it happens is, like you said, because there are these materials that are these white powders that have to basically be suspended in the formula. So they're just floating around in the goop, basically. They're not dissolved, they're hanging around. And so when you spread it on the skin, it looks white. And so, yeah, of course, there are the zinc oxide, the titanium dioxide. Those are the main things. There are some other sunscreen filters that are not available in the States that can
Mhm.
cause a white cast as well. And then something that happens more so in the States, I've found, is with a lot of mattifying sunscreens. So a lot of the ingredients that help to give that really nice matte finish. So like silica is a really popular one. Perlite is another one. There are also white powders that have to be suspended. And depending on how finely milled that silica is, how it's spread in the formula, when you put that on, you can also get a white cast, because I've experienced that with some like chemical sunscreens that, okay, most people's thought is, oh, chemical, no white cast, and that's just it. But when I'm putting it on, I'm like, what is happening? And it's one of those powders that helps it to feel less greasy, which is nice. But then you realize, oh, it's a really large particle size. It's showing up in my hair, in my beard. It's like pooling up in my eyelids. And it's like, oh God, like I got a chemical sunscreen. How could they do this to me? Like I
Yeah.
thought I was in the clear. And it's really, really hard, because there are some formulas where it happens and some where it doesn't, because there are different kinds of silica. There's different shapes, different sizes, all of those things. So it's
Mhm.
hard to tell from reading a label that, like, oh, this is going to be casty versus not. With things that like the zinc and the titanium, those, if those are the only filters, I know it's going to be bad, like off the bat. Like I'm not even attempting. But with some of these other like extra ingredients, it's like, okay, this might be good, it might not. And so when I'm thinking about products, like right next to me is a whole bunch of sunscreens, is I'm thinking about, okay, what could leave a white cast and what I know will not. And the things that could leave a white cast, I have in a separate drawer, because those are things that I can't wear when I have to go to work. And then
Yeah.
everything else,
Yeah.
it's like, okay. And I know, like, the people who I work with know what I do, and it's fine if I come to work looking absolutely insane, but but I don't want to go into a meeting looking
Yeah.
absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I totally feel that, because there's like times where I have to test certain products, especially sunscreens. I'm like, no, but I'm filming later today, and today's not the day, because I don't feel like completely undoing this again, So, because you never
Exactly.
know, and sometimes you don't know until you blast a bunch of lights at your face too, and you're like, oh, hello,
Exactly. You have a light and it's like, oh no, I thought it was
yeah.
fine in the mirror. Oh, it's bad.
Yeah. Or it's like it's not casty, but it's like greasy as like all get out, and you're like, no, this isn't. I can't do this.
Yeah, it is an absolute nightmare to just like blind test something. I'm like, this will be fine. This looks good. And I'm just like, oh no, I've made a horrible mistake. What have I done?
Yeah. We've all felt that regret. So, I would love to talk to you about percentage of the sunscreen filters, because this is something that a lot of people wonder: is there a certain percentage that we should be looking for on the label to know that we're getting the labeled protection? And I think especially in the last couple of years, as there has been a lot of sunscreens that have been tested and found out that they're not really providing the protection that's labeled on the bottle. But of course, I mean, this whole conversation is happening because skincare and sunscreen is a lot more complicated than that. But I would love for you to talk about like what sunscreen formulas, like what can you use in the formula that can boost the SPF rating without necessarily increasing the percentage of the UV filters, and really just your, hints and tips for finding out, if a sunscreen is going to offer the best protection or the protection that they're claiming on the label.
This is hard. This is really difficult, and it's
This is
really
why I'm
hard.
asking you.
It's something that it's really difficult to really know as a consumer. So just getting
Yeah.
to the percentage thing. So there is not a percentage that you should be looking for in terms of sunscreen filters. And a lot of people are thinking, oh, if I use 10% zinc in this product, but then 20% in this product, that 20% has to be more protective. That's not true at all, because there are so many other things that can
Yeah.
affect how those things work in the formula. So when you're actually working with, like, let's just think about mineral sunscreens, when you're working with that, you're normally not working with the powder itself. You're normally working with the powder that's been dispersed in some oil or some film forming agent or in some blend of something else. It's called a slurry.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like white sticky mud, like, is how a lot of these look. It's not pleasant. And depending on what form that you're using, that affects, okay, I can use more of this and get a higher SPF. Oh, I need this much to get this SPF. And depending on how it's spread, I mean, if you think about it, like you're like spreading peanut butter on a sandwich. Let's just say that. If you have like the really like the chunky peanut butter and you're spreading that across, you have all these lumps that are across. And so you might have a lot of peanut butter on there, but when it's spread across, you have all these big hunks that are on there and it's not evenly spread across, versus the smooth peanut butter where you can spread it across and it goes really evenly nice across the skin. So when you're thinking about kind of how these sunscreens are formulated, depending on how well those pigments, how well those filters are dispersed and how they spread on the skin, affects how well that protection is going to be, because you can use less and have it spread really, really widely and well and get really good protection, versus if you're using a high amount but it doesn't spread really well and it just looks really chunky, you're missing spots and you end up with a lower SPF. So those are things that go into all those inactive ingredients that nobody cares about. Those are the things that are really making sure that you're getting that protection. There are also things that reflect light in different ways that you can add to ingredients. There's also different coatings of zinc oxide. There's also lots of ways that you can shape zinc oxide to have it reflect light in different ways. That's also going to affect how much actual sunscreen filter that you need to use, versus just, okay, we just need to put 25% zinc oxide into this cream, mix it up, and here you go. Like, it really is a holistic process that has lots of different things that go into it when you're looking at, how much do I need to use in this? So it's really, really hard to tell. Now, in terms of being able to know, okay, when I look at a bottle, am I actually getting the protection that I'm getting? There's really no way to know. And it's really, really frustrating. So different countries have different regulations about this. But, when you're making a sunscreen, at least in the States, in your first couple of like massive batches, you have to get that batch tested with SPF testing. So it's like, okay, you're getting consistent protection every single time that you make it. That's expensive. And everywhere has different regulations when it comes to that. But, when you're making something, in a lab versus like in a big vat, if you think about if you're, making something in a huge, huge vat, and whoever's manufacturing it puts in a little bit less of this filter or a little bit more of this, all those little small changes, or like if the water supply changes, or all these little, like all these small things, all those things can compound and impact the SPF of the product that you are using, which is crazy. So there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes to make sure that, okay, what we're making is consistent and each batch is going to give the protection that it says. So it's really hard to tell. I wish I could give like if it has this on it, then it's reliable. If it doesn't have this, then it's not. One thing that I personally look for is water-resistant sunscreens. So water-resistant sunscreens have to go through a little bit more testing to make sure that the SPF is really what it says that it is. Because when you're just looking at, regular sunscreen, you put it on the backs of people, they're blasted with UV, then the SPF is measured. But with water-resistant sunscreens, you put it on the backs, they get dunked into water, they come out, dunked into water, come out multiple times, and the SPF is tested again after that. So with regular SPF testing, it's more like a one and done, but with water resistant, it's a multiple like process. So it has to go through like really the ringer. Now, of course, if you don't like texture of water resistant sunscreens, that's difficult. But if there's like one tip I could say, if you're concerned about something not being an SPF that you might think it is, opt for something water resistant, because those do, just by nature of how they work, more testing, and there's more checks to say, okay, this is actually giving you this protection, water resistant for this amount of time. Because what happens is the protection can only go down by a certain percentage in order to be called water resistant. So it's like, okay, it was tested here and it's only gone down by this much after, 80 minutes in a hot tub, then okay, this is probably going to give that high protection. So opt for water resistance if you really want to make sure that you're getting that labeled protection.
That's actually amazing advice. I think that, yeah, of course, like we can't know. And I just had a conversation with Judith from inkydecoder.com talking about what you can tell from an ingredients list. And it's amazing how much you can't tell. And this is one of those situations where, you can know the ingredients, but you can't know the quality, how the ingredient's been treated, where it's been sourced from. And if you don't, and even if you do have a chemistry background, but even if you don't, you can't know how all of those ingredients react and interact with each other and how it all comes together. We're just a list of ingredients is never going to tell us that, which is frustrating as a consumer. But I think it also helps us to understand that there's maybe some other ways that we can feel more comfortable about the sunscreen we're choosing, knowing about the additional testing with water resistant rated sunscreens. So important. And I think many of us are often using non-water resistant sunscreens for water resistant what should be a water resistant activity, right? So it's important to know that there is an extra level of testing there, that they can be more protective just because of the testing, but also because they're adhering to your skin a little bit better too. So if you're sweating, if you're active, of course, if you're by water, that should be your natural choice anyways, because they have been really put through the ringer. And I think that actually makes sense why so many Korean sunscreens are not labeled with water resistance, because that extra step in testing, especially for those indie brands, they just can't afford to do that extra step a lot of the time.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So it's a really great insight, to get a better understanding of like the choices that brands are making with their sunscreen products, but also on the other end, if we're looking for the most protective, we need to be looking for that water resistance too, which is
100%.
super helpful. So let's talk about hyperpigmentation, because this is something that you educate a lot on in your content. And of course, we know that sunscreen is one of those first lines of defenses when it comes to preventing hyperpigmentation, but also if you're working on fading it, massive protection to help you accelerate your results. You have a really easy to understand model for the very complex process of melanin creation. So can you walk us through your ASTP model, and can you share like what skincare ingredients can work at each of the 4 steps?
This is a deep cut. I feel like I haven't talked about this in a while, but yeah, I posted about this first like a couple years ago. I feel like, and I just brought it back. But yeah, it's a complicated process, but you can really break it down into 4 key steps. So what happens with pigmentation is that your pigment cells are activated. So that's the A step. Once those pigment cells get activated, then those pigment cells start to actually produce the pigment. So that's the synthesis step. That's the S. Then once that pigment is produced, then it gets transferred to upper layers of the skin. That's the T. And then once it's transferred to the upper layers of the skin, then you actually start to see that pigment show. So that's the P, that's the pigment. And so when you're thinking about dealing with pigmentation, getting something that hits everywhere in that pathway can really help your results a lot. It's not going to be like, oh, this is my cure. I'll never have dark spots ever again, but it helps to slow down that process. So when it comes to the activation, so pigment cells can get activated in a lots of different ways. So sun damage is a really big one. There's also different hormones that can activate it. There's like trauma to the skin that can activate it. So depending on where your pigmentation comes from, there's different kind of products that can help with that. So if you're thinking about like sun damage, obviously sunscreen. Like sunscreen is the best product that's going to help with the activation step, straight up, hands down. But for example, if you're getting like post-acne dark marks, dealing with your acne is going to help those pigment cells not be activated because, okay, you're not getting that trauma to the skin that's activating those pigment cells. And there are also some other newer peptides, also tranexamic acid, as well as something else that helps with that activation step. So sunscreen is my go-to product for that activation step, but there are some other things that can also help as well. Then for that synthesis step, so these are the most popular brightening ingredients, the things that are, that tyrosinase inhibition. So that's the things we're thinking about: the kojic acid, the alpha-arbutin, the ascorbic acid. oh God, licorice root. There's so many ingredients that cover in that kind of tyrosinase inhibition realm. So when you're looking at a product for hyperpigmentation, it probably has one, if not many, of those tyrosinase inhibiting products in there. Then for the transfer step, when you're getting that pigment and it transfers to the upper layers of the skin, the most popular ingredients that can do this, one is niacinamide. Like niacinamide is in everything.
Yeah.
Now, niacinamide is a really, really popular way to do that, but also retinoids also help a lot with that transfer step. So having those two helps a lot when it comes to preventing that pigment transfer to upper layers of the skin. And then in dealing with the actual pigment, that's where there's the retinoids, of course, that help with that skin cell turnover. There's also exfoliants, thinking about your glycolic, lactic, and mandelic acid that helps to kind of accelerate that skin cell turnover. And so when you're thinking about the whole kind of like ASTP process, you can really get a long way with sunscreen every day, a retinoid that you can tolerate every day, and if you're feeling fancy, like a targeted brightening serum. But with just that, you've really built like a really good like anti-pigmentation regimen that doesn't have to be super complicated. You have to have, oh, I gotta have 18 different products. Like it doesn't need to be that complicated. Like if you're looking for a couple of those key things that you can use on a consistent basis, that can help you a lot when it comes to pigmentation, but it's also just a really difficult problem to treat because the actual pathway is so complicated. How do people deal with it is different. You know, if you have melasma, that's a whole separate thing. There's just so much that goes into it. And it's why for so many dermatologists, it's a really popular thing to, okay, do I need to get a peel? Do I need to do laser? There's so many treatments that you can do. But in terms of home care, there are things that you can do. But if you're not seeing results from those things, talking to a doctor and being like, hey, here's what I'm struggling with. Here are the products that I'm using. What can I do? And getting that professional intervention can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's so important to remember sunscreen is like that first line of defense. And really why I was so interested to talk to you about this because, yeah, of course, we know sunscreen is going to prevent the fine lines and wrinkles, the collagen breakdown. But I think for a lot of us too, maybe we are struggling with hyperpigmentation or an uneven skin tone. And so it's so helpful to remember that sunscreen can actually prevent that very first activation step from even occurring. But also learning that there's other ingredients that can be used at those steps that can also help as well. So I think, like you said, it is a complicated thing and it's different for everybody. And depending on what's triggering it, the way that you treat that's going to be different. Acne is different than melasma, triggered by hormones, which is, different than an inflammatory event or a trauma to the skin. So knowing that is obviously very helpful for everybody's individual journey, but just remembering that sunscreen is a part of that arsenal for hyperpigmentation and that it is like that first line of defense is super helpful because sometimes it's hard to put sunscreen on every single day.
100%, 100%.
But it helps to remind you that, especially if you are struggling with hyperpigmentation. So I would love to talk about the gap of representation within the industry, because the work that you're doing with your sunscreen database, I think, of course, it helps make sunscreen less complicated. It makes finding a sunscreen that works for you very easy. But I think that there's also another level to that work in the fact that you are looking for sunscreens that are going to work for skin of color. And that's just not something that seems to be a priority in the sunscreen world. And that's what I'm saying when I say a gap in representation, is I feel like that's just not a concern for a lot of people who are behind the scenes creating sunscreens. So, we're talking about like casty sunscreens, but we're also talking about limited shade ranges within makeup and those universal tints on mineral sunscreens, which I'm not sure who those work for. And of course, there's an issue of non-inclusive research and testing for skin of color when it comes to sunscreens. So really, does it have to be this complicated? Do we really need to have this big gap in the industry? I'd really love to hear from your perspective as somebody who works in research and development. What can we do to close this gap when it comes to sunscreen and skin of color?
Yeah, it's again, it's a lot. It's a really complex problem to solve. And I think that a lot of it has to do with kind of representation at all levels kind of in the industry, because I know,
Yeah.
we're thinking about like people on the brand side who are kind of who are our interface with the industry, of course. But when you're in it, you're thinking about the formulators, you're thinking about the people who are in product development, you're thinking about the people who are actually developing raw materials and doing those tests, the people who we're never going to see, we're never going to meet, we're never going to meet those people. And by having more inclusivity from the beginning and then seeing how that trickles up to the brands, like that's how a lot of that change happens. But it's
Yeah.
hard. We're again making changes, but it's very, very slow, essentially. And when it comes to kind of the inclusivity piece, I think that for especially when it comes to makeup, it's really, really hard, is that it can be expensive to be inclusive sometimes, which is
Hmm.
really frustrating because I think that we like since we had the Fenty craze has changed the world of makeup, and now there's
Yeah.
like a new standard that's been set for the Fenty Beauties, the Rem Beauties, all these big brands that have lots of money behind them and can do this massive shade range and do all of this testing and really have that inclusivity happen. Um, but that is a hard process because when you're thinking about it, from an R&D perspective, each one of those products has to be tested separately, formulated separately. You have to buy a certain amount of them in order to meet all of your targets, and it's really a complicated process to have. Okay, like if you have 60 shades of this product, that's so much money that
Yeah.
goes into that to have something like that is really, really inclusive. But at the same time, we see these really uninclusive shade ranges where it's like, okay, here's 16 shades of porcelain, and then the one for medium and then the one for dark, and it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, that's not great. And when you're thinking about it from a purely business perspective, it's like, okay, if a company mostly caters towards like people of a lighter skin tone, that's where they're going to put a lot of their money into targeting that group.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that you are intentionally or not kind of really inhibiting new people from discovering that product by not catering towards those people as well. But you're thinking, okay, but if we don't already have those people, can we justify buying 25,000 foundations in
Hmm.
cocoa, mocha, and latte, whatever, that are that are going to be there if the market isn't there to buy it? So it's a really like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. Because it's like, okay,
Mm.
if we do and we put all this money into this, will it be worth it? But if we don't, now that we're in this range of like inclusivity being, it should be like a bare minimum when it comes to these products, then it's like, okay, then how do we combat that? What do we say to people who say, oh, I want to try this. Oh, but I can't. It's not in my shade range. And then when it comes to sunscreen, it's even more complicated because with makeup, it's like, okay, we have to get this certain kind of like color payoff, and that's the thing. But with sunscreen, it also has to work as a sunscreen, which is which is really, really hard. So, okay, I have right here a product. I'm not going to show what the brand is, but a universal tinted sunscreen. And I don't know who whose
Oh,
skin is this color,
The
but like
Simpsons.
the honestly, like it's just like, in what universe is this universal? Like this is bananas.
Yeah.
And for me, especially because I'm applying like the right amount that you need to get the labeled SPF, this looks crazy on
Yeah.
on me. And so again, for things like this comes down to, okay, people who have darker skin tones are not in these rooms when these things are being developed. Because if
Yeah.
anyone who looks like me got this and was just like, okay, no, we got accent, no,
Nope.
this is not inclusive, and it's bananas. And having something that works really well for sunscreen is really okay, when you're looking at mineral stuff, you either have to, use a nano zinc or a micro zinc or something that is like as sheer as you can get it. You have to do that. You have to do some kind of universal tint, and you end up with things like this that always have that yellowish kind of undertone, which never look great on anybody. Or you have to go the like foundation route where you have multiple shades of a tinted sunscreen. And making a sunscreen is expensive enough, and then you have to do different shades
Yeah.
of that, and that is going to add to that cost. And again, it's that thinking about, okay, if we invest all this money, will it be worth it, or are we just going to be throwing money down the drain? So it's a hard nut to crack, and depending on the business, it's like, okay, are we going to take this risk, or are we going to say, hey, we don't have this, but either we're working on it, or just realizing it's like, hey, this is who we're marketing for, and that's just it, and just like doubling down on that. Because I feel like I'd rather have a brand, to be honest, say, hey, this is who we're marketing for. Like, I know that none of the tone up sunscreens from Korea or Japan are made for me. Like that I'm not the market. And to me, that's fine. But it's like, okay, either we just, hey, this is not for that group, then have them say, oh no, like, because I think something that we've always seen is like, oh, this was just a proof of concept. We just wanted to like see if people liked it and things like that. And it feels like we're an afterthought. And that is like even worse, I think, than
Yeah.
being like, oh, we thought about you, but you're like in round two. And it's like, okay, like, I don't feel like taken care of or like thought about or
Yeah.
considered as a consumer. So it's
Yeah.
really, really hard. It's really, really hard. And there's not a perfect solution. It really just, okay, what makes sense for this brand at this time? But when we have things that are coming out that are being called universal and it looks like this, like we have a problem.
Yeah, you definitely need to take care when making a claim like that because
Yeah.
I mean, proof is right there. And I do see a lot of everything that you just said makes so much sense. And like we're sophisticated enough to understand that like consumerism and like capitalism runs everything. So at the end of the day, it has to be something that makes sense with the money that you're spending and the money that you're projecting to get back from it, right? Your profit.
Mm-hmm.
So that totally makes sense. But at the same time, I also feel like there's so much defensiveness for not including those folks in the room to begin with, and if that's
Yes.
not who you're marketing to, fine. But I've seen it towards you, especially. I've seen people like, wasn't there a brand owner? We're not going to say any names, but like, didn't somebody say that you put too much sunscreen on and that's why you were getting a white cast? And if you just like pulled back on that amount, then you would get the result that they're claiming that you're supposed to get.
Yeah, that is something that I get a lot. That, oh, I'm applying too much. And I think that, when most people think about putting on sunscreen, it's like the little dab on the finger, you put it on,
Gwyneth
and
Paltrow.
yeah, like, and like
Yeah.
that's it. But for me, like, I know exactly how much sunscreen I need to use for my face. I know the surface area of my face because sunscreen's tested at a very specific weight per square centimeter of skin. So I know exactly how much I need to put on. Like, it's been a lot. Like, I've got this down to a science at
You
this
have
point.
you have taped every square inch of your face. You know how much you need.
Exactly. It's like I know how much that I need to be using. And so, and when people think about that, like, when sunscreen's going through, testing, at no point in the testing process does it have to be elegant or nice or look good. It just needs to work.
Mm,
And so when you're coming from that perspective, and I put something on and it's like, oh, I put too much on, a lot of people have gotten defensive. I know that there are brands who curse my name in product in product development because, like, hey, this looks terrible on darker skin tones, but you say that this works for everyone, but like, it doesn't when you're using
yeah.
the amount that you're supposed to be using. And I think that shifting that mindset of like, okay, this is how much that you need to be wearing. And so, yeah, I mean, when you apply only this tiny, tiny amount, of course it's going to be universal when this is going across your entire face. But when you're applying the amount that you actually need to get the SPF that you listed on the label, then it's more than that. And I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of people think that I'm just trying to trash brands, and I'm really not. Like, I want everyone to make good products. But at the same time, it's like, okay, when it's being used the way that it's supposed to be used, this is not living up to the claim that you have made. And
Yeah.
that's not that's very objective. And that's it.
Yeah. Dr. Julian Sass. Don't ask him if he's tried Black Girl Sunscreen. Well, have you tried
I get
this
that
though?
question. I get that question all the time, and I am sure that you have experiences because when you're reviewing products, like this is what you do. It's like, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried this? And it's just like, guys, like I know what works well for me. And it's like when you're giving like something like not a great review, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
but like why are you trying this? And it's just like this is what I do. Like I'm testing things out. I saw a really good comparison comparing it to like food bloggers and like food reviewers. Like if they have a meal that they don't like, it's like this person knows what kind of food that they like, but
Yeah.
they're reviewing it because they're all trying to get the lay of the market. Like I have a whole cabinet of sunscreens that work really really well for me, but I'm testing others. And so whenever I have those reviews, I get comments like, oh, you gotta try Black Girl Sunscreen. It's like, guys, I've tried everything they make, lots of good stuff, so don't worry. Like I'm just reviewing things to help you all make more informed purchases, because like Black Girl Sunscreen is not for everybody, just like any product is not for everyone, and I just want to give
Right.
people options.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to say Black girl on it for it to be for Black people. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's more out there. There is
exactly.
more, and that is part of what you do it, but you also test for everybody. So I think it also goes back to what you said earlier about the consumer demand on sunscreen to be more elegant, more easy to use, more everyday. What you're doing is the same thing. You're saying, let's, say, hey, this is not a universal tint. Let's do a little bit better. Let's try to see if we can't make this more elegant. Let's try to see if we can't make this more casty. I'm going to point out what is like that so that, consumers aren't wasting their time and money if that's not going to work for them. So I think it's just the exact same thing. It's just that we're putting that pressure on the market to do better, because as consumers, we want better products. And to just throw like, oh, you're putting too much on, or, oh, just try this other brand, that's not helpful to the conversation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like it does not move us forward at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
I mean, like thinking about, when Supergoop launched on the scene and Unseen Sunscreen took everyone by storm, and it's just like, wait, what? Sunscreen could be like this? Like the whole time. And that really was one of the big shifts that started. It's like, okay, wow, we can have these really nice formulas, and it doesn't have to be this really terrible stuff. But yeah, I mean, I obviously, like, I work in the industry, like I understand how hard it is to get these products out the door. I know how much work that it takes, but at the same time, you have to understand that like doing the bare minimum is just not going to cut it for lots of consumers, and they're going to be really unhappy with the experience that you have provided. And it's just like, listen, I'm just one person. You might have lots of people who love it. There are some lovely light-skinned blonde people who send me mineral sunscreens every single day, and I'm just like, I'm so glad that works for you. It will not work for me, but if you like it, wear it every single day. But it's not gonna work for me, and that's fine. And I feel like a lot of people kind of think, oh, you're just trashing this, whatever. It's like, no, like if you've tried mineral stuff, because even when I'm putting things on my skin, I'm thinking, okay, how bad is this? Like, is this fully like white paint? This will not look good on anybody. Or it's like, okay, on me, this isn't great. But, sometimes I'll use my fiance as a guinea pig. It's like, okay, how well does this work on your much lighter skin tone? Okay, this is actually good for him. Okay, this will be great for lighter skin tones, because I don't want anyone who like works at these brands to read this and go, oh, he just hates us. It's like, no, like it's just, it didn't work well for me. This is the cast potential on my skin tone. But even things that are really casty can work really well for someone who has really, really light skin. And that's great. But sometimes things are just a really unpleasant experience. And that's just it.
Yeah. It's like we should accept the limitations of the product, but we shouldn't be accepting the limitations of what goes on behind that product in a way. It's like we know that sunscreen has limitations. It's not going to be the word universal probably should never be used when it comes to describing a sunscreen in any, way, shape, or form, because it's just never going to be like that. But behind the scenes, there are limitations that I believe have been self-imposed just because of the structure of our society. And that is where we shouldn't be accepting the limitations. To say, hey, this
Yeah.
isn't marketed towards me, fine. But let's question why we don't have anybody on these teams behind these products that aren't saying, can we do better? Can we do more? Can we be more representative?
Exactly. It's a really frustrating thing, and I know that we haven't gotten into it, but now that there's such a like really rise of mineral sunscreens and
Mhm.
how that now leads into like just a lack of inclusivity with those products, and it's just like okay, that it feels like there's a really easy tie-in there because I feel like so many people are just like, oh, it's so easy, just use mineral or whatever. But I've talked to so many people who have skin like darker than me who are just like who've gone through a very similar process of okay, I want to use this US chemical sunscreen, but this group told me it's gonna cause cancer, hurt my baby, all of this stuff, and so then I use mineral, but then I can't wear it, like it looks so terrible, so I feel like I just
Yeah.
shouldn't bother. And it's like okay, you've gone through this whole thing and now you're not even wearing it. And it's just like because consumers are now being made to feel so afraid of
Yeah.
products and things that have years of safety data behind them, and it's like oh well, now this is going to be harmful to me, and then this does not cater to me, so then I'm
Yeah.
just not gonna bother at all. We, as the science community, the science communicators, can educate until we are blue in the face, but there's gonna be a point. It's just like, hey, I just don't want to use chemical sunscreen because it stings my face or my eyes sting or whatever. And this again ties into getting the diversity and the inclusion at every level in the industry, because if we're able
Yeah.
to innovate to a point where like oh, we have this mineral sunscreen with this very very minimal white cast and making formulas that are accessible, and it's like okay, you don't have to make that compromise. It's like oh,
Mhm.
we have this really elegant mineral sunscreen. When it'll be made, who knows, I haven't found it. But when you when we have these really nice mineral formulas, it's like okay, we are taking into account all the fear mongering that may not be accurate, but we're also making a formula that is really accessible and inclusive. And so people aren't as scared, but it's a whole long, complicated thing that has
Yeah.
so many moving parts.
Right. Yeah. And I so appreciate you sharing your perspective, especially from the research and development side, because it's always been my suspicion that like it's the behind the scenes, it's the testing, it's the concept of the product before it even like gets up on the formulation that's where it starts, and I think that there are like I said, there's limitations that are acceptable, and then there's self-imposed limitations that don't need to be there. And I think it's time for us to start looking at the self-imposed limitations behind the scenes and start
Totally.
questioning, um, why is that a limitation? Because it probably doesn't need to
Exactly.
be.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I feel like I just want to go like boom, 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 more, 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 more. But maybe season two.
Yes.
Not for today. I so appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom with us. And I would love it if you can just share where listeners and watchers can connect with you, and find your sunscreen database and learn from you more.
Sure. So my handle is Scamander14. That's SCAMANDER number one, number four. My database is at scamander14.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter sometimes. I'm on Threads, never. And I'm all over the internet. I have a TikTok. I don't post there because TikTok is a lot for me. So,
Same.
but
Yeah.
that is where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
What an amazing conversation and a fantastic way to end season one of Unpacking Beauty. I can't believe we've come to the end already. And I have to say a big, big thank you to you. You make this show possible. Your support, your listens, your watches, your thumbs up, your rating with stars, your written reviews. You don't even understand. Not only your support, it means so much to me on a personal level because this is a project that is so important to me, but it is support that has absolutely allowed this show to grow and has allowed me to get such amazing expert guests for you. I am so excited about the creation process of season 2. I am excited to come back bigger and better than ever. So in this hiatus period, I would love it if you would continue to listen, to watch, to rate with stars. If you haven't written a review yet, please take a few moments to write a few sentences about how you're enjoying the show and what you look forward to in the future with season 2. Although you won't be getting me in your feed regularly for a little bit this winter, I'm still available on all platforms. On podcasts, I'm available on YouTube. If you haven't watched the conversations, it's kind of a different experience. And hey, vice versa, listening to the conversations when you're on the go, commuting to work, doing the dishes can really bring a new element to the show. So please continue to support the show during this break. And I do want to hear from you as I'm working on season 2. Who do you want to see on the podcast? What questions do you want me to unpack? Let me know. Get in touch. In the show notes, everywhere that you're listening or watching, I have a link to where you can leave me a voicemail. I'll feature your voice on the show. If you want to get in touch through Spotify, answer the Q&A. And if you're on YouTube, drop your suggestions in the comments below. I want to keep hearing from you because this is a show that I create for you, with you. So please let me know all of your thoughts so we can come back bigger and better for season 2 of Unpacking Beauty, coming out early spring of 2024. A big thank you to all the guests who shared their time with us this season and their knowledge. And again, a big thank you to you who make this show possible. I could not have done it without you. You are so amazing. You are so beautiful. I will talk to you soon in season 2 of Unpacking Beauty. Bye.